And so let me ask Aoife, how am I doing? Not so good. Okay. Yeah, something has gone pear-shaped here. Okay, so we seem to be back. Let me just get Aoife's audio back. Are we back? Are we live?
Hi there. Sorry, Derek. Yeah, there was a slight technical, like a little there for a minute. Holly's let me you are actually back, but I think you froze again. So I think we're okay right now. We'll keep an eye on it, but bear with us, folks. The wonders of technology, it tends to happen right before a session, but I'll alert you, Derek, if there's any issue. If you want to keep your phone nearby, that'd be handy.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies for that, folks. Let me tell you, our technology is working on this end, so something's going wrong with the connection out to you guys. So I'm hoping that we are back again. Let's move it along because we're going to run up against time as we work through things. So, Aoife, just a real quick check-in. Where are people joining us from today?
Sorry, with our little, didn't get a chance to see. I don't think anyone's had the chance to post in the comments yet, but I know people that I know are joining. I'm joining from England, from Ireland, from France. We have some from Kenya, and the UAE as well. So I'm sure those comments will come in shortly once the lag has caught up with itself. But excited to be here, Derek. This is a topic that has been brought to light a lot over the last 2 years, but I think it's something that's really important as we move into this post-pandemic world. So excited for what you have to share with us.
Yeah, thanks, Aoife. And you know, one of the reasons we're doing this is when we asked you on the launch, what would you like to see us cover? It's a topic, resilience and dealing with these situations is something that came up in a lot of the correspondence. Thank you for that. Again, just for those who are just came in when we were frozen, our technology works. There's something wrong either with LinkedIn or with the streaming software Restream. But we're back. So let's move on into it and let me get back to, here we go. Okay, so look, for those of you who haven't met me before, let me do the quick 10-second advertorial piece. I work for Genos International, so there's Aoife. We're an emotional intelligence organization, assessments, online and in-person EI development programs, resilience programs. We also, for those of you who are coaches, consultants or trainers, either in-house or independent, we also accredit certified emotional intelligence practitioners. And we are blessed to have been one of the top 20 assessment companies in the world for the last 5 years, according to the Training Industry Association in the United States. So we're something we're fairly proud of. So advertisement over, let's dive straight into things. Now, let me tell you that you're going to need your phone for this because we're just going to ask you to make a contribution to a small poll, actually, I think directly after this slide, and then we're going to ask you again at the end. So before I do that, let me give you a really important date for your diary. Richard Boyatzis is one of the foremost researchers in the area of emotional intelligence, in the area of coaching, and has done over the last 25 or 30 years all of the real heavy lifting in this area. His most recent book, Helping People Change, is an absolute masterpiece for anybody who works with people and has to bring them along, help them to change. Whether you're a coach, consultant, trainer, a team leader, a manager, a CEO, etc. He has given us an hour of his time on the 24th. So please, please, please don't miss it. And in fact, if you get an opportunity, go onto Amazon, buy the book. You won't regret it. And bring along your questions. So let's dive straight in. I want to ask you just to help me out with something really quickly. So if you can just hold your camera on your phone up to the QR code on the screen there, or just in your browser put in poll EV Derek M000, those are zeros, and just tell me, for you, what's your attitude to stress? Is it an unpleasant condition that you try to suppress, get out of your life, and push out? Or is it a useful condition that you consciously utilize? Now, I'm not asking you what should the stress you experience be. I'm asking you genuinely, what way do you deal with the stress you experience? Is it something that you try to push out, or is it something you actively utilize? And while you're doing a quick answer there, I'm just going to take a quick drink because I got this little froggy in my throat. Okay, hopefully it's gone. Oh my God, I was muted. Oh my God, I was muted. Good Lord. I tell you what, you talk about stress. This is the stress of the technology interfering with us. I'm sorry about that, folks. So for those of you who are able to read my lips, you know exactly where we landed. So apologies for that. Yeah, interesting day so far. So let me start again. Not from the beginning, because you get the sense. The majority of people here, 80% of you, are saying that the stress you experience is an unpleasant condition that you actively suppress. And that puts you in the majority of people in the world. So let's have a look at that. If you look at the research, or you go on to Google and you just put in stress, you get lots of headlines. But one of the things you'll get a really strong impression on is that stress is the devil incarnate. It is the big baddie that can potentially make us sick, can take a toll on our health. And indeed, before the pandemic came along, the World Health Organization, who have other fish to fry now, were saying that stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. My God, if only that was the real major health epidemic. But that's just an indication of, in general, the messaging that we're all being fed for the last 50 years. Now, it's partly right. Since a guy called Hans Selye did the original research on stress about 50 years ago, and by the way, he did it with rats, not with people, and he stressed them by tying heavy weights onto their back, throwing them into buckets of water, and then examining their systems to see what impact it has upon them. Predictably, they were stressed, and he coined the expression stress. And since then, we have lived with the idea that stress is as I say, the devil incarnate, the worst thing that you could possibly experience. Now, yet, and particularly over the last 25 or 30 years, there is as much research that speaks to great benefits of stress. And the sorts of benefits, you can see them here: peak performance, increased mental toughness, deepened relationships, greater appreciation for life, and others. So while stress can be harmful, and we look at how, an awful lot of the stress that we have can actually be turned into something that can really be beneficial to us. And that's what we want to look at. How do you take the stress, which is not necessarily harmful for you, and turn it into a source of energy, turn it into a source of productivity, turn it into a source of peak performance? I first became interested in this topic when I became aware of this study, which was done back in 2002. Now, in terms of quality of studies, researchers always talk about sample size, and they talk about longitudinal studies that are run over a long period of time, and studies that have intellectual rigor. And this had them all: 30,000 adults over 8 years in the United States. And it was quite a simple study. They asked people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? And then they said, do you believe, now note that word believe, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then over the next year, or next 8 years, they monitored who died and when they died. Now, predictably, people who had a lot of stress had a 43% higher risk of dying. And a lot of you are saying, I knew it, I knew it'd kill you, I knew the stats were right. Well, that's only half the story, because that was only true, and this is really important, that was only true for those who believed that stress was harmful for them. Let me say that again. People who had a lot of stress, who believed that stress was harmful for them, had a 43% greater likelihood of dying. But people who experienced a lot of stress but didn't believe it was always completely harmful were less likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest level of risk in the study. So you can have a lot of stress in your life, and if your mindset is such that not all stress is the devil incarnate, it has a big impact on the outcome that you experience. So the impact for these people who had that particular mindset about stress was that they had a lower a lower impact even than those people who had smaller amounts of stress. I always think it was kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the researchers also observed, they said that over that period they estimated 182,000 people died from the belief that stress was bad for them. And that's what I want to address in the first part of our session today. I want to help you, if you have a mindset that stress is universally bad for you, I want to help you in this session, before you finish this session, to change that mindset. And we can change it here and now. I'm going to give you all the evidence that you need that to do that. By the way, they estimated that this killed more than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and murder. So this is a worthwhile session to be tuned into. So let's talk first off about, why did the attitude or the mindset about stress make such a difference? And to understand that, you have to go back and understand a little bit about the way we're wired. Now, over the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of the social sciences and even the economic sciences have looked at the way the brain works and the way we show up in the world. And you've probably come across some of this, so I'm going to move fairly quickly. But let me say to you that if you were to take a pen and stick it in your eye, and take another one and stick it in your ear, please don't do this at home. Where it would cross over is in the middle of a part of the brain called, loosely, the emotional brain. It's a very ancient part of the brain, and it is the seat of your emotions. And at the heart of that emotional brain is something called the amygdala. You can think of the amygdala as being the smoke alarm of the brain, continually processing anything coming in through your eyes, your ears, or anywhere else, just from your thoughts, to see, is this a threat? And if it is a threat, it wants to get you the heck away from it. So this amygdala is continually monitoring the environment, and if it sees something that it doesn't like, that it feels as a threat to your existence, it triggers the release of the stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol starts off a completely automatic process that begins with a big injection of adrenaline from the adrenal glands down near your kidneys, and puts you into an autopilot state where, without the benefit of your thinking brain, you start to shut down all the parts of your system that you don't need. So it closes down your sex drive, closes down your digestive system, closes down your immune system, closes down everything you don't need to run away. And it puts you into, you've heard the expression, fight or flight mode. So it starts your heart beating faster, it starts you breathing more deeply, so that you get more oxygen-rich blood down to your legs and your arms so you can fight or run away. Okay. We'll come back in a few moments to that, because that's a really important dimension. Now, think about this. How does it get all of that extra blood out to your arms and legs? It does it by narrowing the vessels, the blood vessels in your heart. So when you're under stress, somebody comes up behind you and goes, boom! And for a moment you're in stress, all of that whole process I just mentioned takes off on autopilot, and it starts to contract your blood vessels in your heart. So the blood vessels in the heart close down so that the blood pressure gets higher, the blood moves faster, and it gets to your arms and legs faster. Now, here's one of the problems, is that classic fight or flight response, which is reducing the diameter of those blood vessels and increasing your blood pressure, that's okay in small doses. But if you experience that over a long period of time, I don't think you have to be of a certain age to know a lot of high blood pressure is just not good for you. A lot of pressure in any closed system is just not good. And that's where the negative effects of stress come from, mainly from blood pressure associated with the closing down of the blood vessels. So we'll come back to how you can deal with that a little bit later on. Now, let's step over to another side and look at stress in a slightly different way, using the sort of stress performance curve. This is important, okay? So actually, let me put myself here. VMake stand. Let me put myself up there so you can see that a little bit more clearly. So on the left-hand side is how well you're performing, how well you're doing your job, how well you can bring the best version of yourself. And across the bottom, the stimulation and the motivation is what we would generally call stress. So here's what is often referred to as eustress. Now, for the people in the United Kingdom, or people elsewhere in the EU, this is not EU stress caused by Brexit. It's you. EU is the Greek a prefix that comes from the Greek word for good. So it's basically good stress, because there is good stress. A life without stress is boring. On those days when there's nothing motivating you, making you want to get up and get moving, you're in what I characterize here as the drone zone. In low stress, you tend to have low performance. You tend to have very, very little motivation, stimulation to get things done. A life without some kind of stress is actually quite boring. And as the stress goes up, and you start to feel, for example, the deadline to get your presentation done, or the deadline to get your technology on your Genos Live system working correctly, you notice that you start to get sharper, better, and notice along this side that your performance is going up. Now, I want you to think of the last time when you had one of those frickin' fantastic days. One of those days when you just couldn't do anything wrong and everything was just moving along, and you were in that zone that a Hungarian scientist, Csikszentmihalyi, difficult name to say, called the flow zone, where you were just knocking it out of the park, doing the best work you ever did. You were under pressure, sure. You might have been on your feet doing a presentation like this, but you were really killing it. And just think about that. On that day, when you were knocking out your best results, you were under stress, but in general, it was manageable because, and it helped you to get the best results you'd ever gotten before. Now, typically what happens when we're in flow zone, time goes by really quickly. We have this tremendous sense of satisfaction. We're doing better work than we ever did before, and we don't notice what's going on around us. But let me tell you, because there's stress involved in that, your heart is beating that little bit faster. Your system is on alert. It's doing all these things that were under that stress that we were talking about earlier on. So ultimately what happens is it burns up a lot of your resources. And at some stage on that day, when you were having the best day you ever had in your life, you saw and you realized, this is stressful stuff, man. And it might have been just that you said, wow, suddenly I'm really, really tired. One of the first signs of stress, just that sort of fatigue. But either way, you notice you're really killing it and you've never had a better day, and then suddenly, boom, I'm feeling stressed. And you realize, man, I'm tired. Oh, I'm under pressure. This is really taking it out of me. Now, that's where 50 years of conditioning that stress is bad for your mindset takes a toll. Because in that moment that you realize, I'm stressed. If you got a stress as negative, or stress must be avoided or eliminated, and 80% of the people on this call do, well then in that moment things start to change. And this is a really important inflection point. What the majority of people start to do is try to avoid stress. And you go onto the web and you will get dozens of articles from really good, you would think, reliable sources that say how to avoid stress, how to duck stress, how to evade stress, and so on and so forth. You cannot avoid stress. It's just not possible. To be human is from time to time to be stressed. So you can't avoid it, but what you can do is you can work with it and you can harness that stress. But what we tend to do in that moment when we realize we're stressed, oh, how do I get rid of this? Oh, I think I'll sit down and do some deep breathing, do some mindfulness training, and so on and so forth, because I need to get rid of this stress. Now, don't get me wrong. We teach breathing programs, we teach mindfulness programs, and they are tremendously effective ways of dealing with stress. But they don't get rid of it. And you can't avoid it. It doesn't help you avoid it. It helps you to deal with it. So here's the challenge about that moment when you suddenly realize I'm stressed. A challenging event happens. So let's say, for example, actually let me give you a real life example from today. Everything is going just great. You're really in the moment. Everything's flying with your Genos Live presentation. And then suddenly you see a text come in down on the desk and Aoife says, you're frozen. Now in that moment, you're stressed. Yeah, I can tell you I was stressed. In that moment of stress, the typical inclination is, I need to get rid of this stress because that's going to get in my way and it's going to interrupt me, and I need to get, and you start to try and push it out of your way. Now, here's the challenge with trying to do that. Let's say my technology goes wrong. I'm feeling stressed. The moment we feel stressed, the majority of us are programmed to try and get rid of it. Stress is bad for me, I need to get rid of it. Stress is bad for me, I need to get rid of it. Now, the moment you start trying to suppress stress, your emotional brain says, oh, here's another threat, stress. And it gets triggered into more stress by the stress. And that's why the majority of the stress that you and I experience is secondary stress coming from some primary, maybe legitimate stress. In other words, we get stressed about stress. We get into this loop. Well, the moment, think about it, your most stressful day recently, the moment you start to feel stressed, you start to worry about the fact that you're stressed, and I can't have it. What if it keeps me awake tonight? What if I can't sleep tonight? And what if I can't make that presentation tomorrow? And what if, and you cycle around. And that's where most of our stress comes from. Stress becomes the source of stress. And it can get you to a stage where you just freeze. Now, that fight or flight is actually the fight, flight, or freeze response. And you don't often see it outside of animals anymore. I mean, a deer gets caught in the headlights of a car and they freeze because they think if they don't move, you can't see them. But we also freeze. We get under sufficient stress and we say, I don't know where to start. Where can I go? And you lose perspective. Everything that was okay yesterday and was very doable is suddenly really difficult. And if it's not dealt with properly, it spirals into anxiety. And when that happens, you go from that wonderful eustress into self-explanatory distress. And when you go into distress, notice the effect on your performance. On the day that you're stressed, and the deeper you fall into it, the more your performance goes down. The first thing you often notice about stress is, man, I'm tired. And then the second thing might be that because your emotional brain has switched off, your digestive system has switched off your immune system, you might notice that you get more gastric upsets, or you're more inclined to get more colds and flus because, particularly over time, if you're stressed over a period of time, because your system has switched off everything it doesn't need to fight or flight. And if it goes on too long, it can really turn into breakdown and burnout. And we want to stop it before we get there. When you try to avoid it, here's what you do. If you've got that mindset that it's negative, what you try to do is push it down. Now, if you manage to suppress and remove all sources of stress in your life, well, you remove all sources of motivation as well. Notice what happens if you did. This is what we're inclined to do. Notice what happens if you were successful. You push the stress away, you push away the source of the energy that made you successful and performant in the first place. So that just doesn't work terribly well. And most of what you read about managing stress is talking about suppressing it. But there is another way. So how can changing our attitude or our mindset to stress change its impact upon it? Because we saw in that study that people who felt that stress wasn't harmful for them had much better outcomes. So how can we get into an honest place where we really believe that? Several years ago in Harvard, three researchers from Harvard University, Yale University, and Stanford University, Ali Crum, Sean Aker, and Peter Salovey, did a study called Stress is Enhancing. And they did it just after the global financial crisis, when a lot of financial houses were losing people like it was going out of fashion, and in many cases losing their businesses. And they took 388 really, really stressed people from those environments, and they put them through some training, or at least they put some of them through training. The first third got what they called Stress is Enhancing training. Guess what? You're going to get that today. The first third got Stress is Harmful training, which emphasized all of the harmful elements of stress that I just mentioned. The second third got Stress is Enhancing training that talked about how stress could be a source of motivation and energy. And the final third got no training whatsoever. The Stress is Enhancing group had extraordinarily different outcomes. In terms of the typical stress-related symptoms, they had fewer headaches, they had fewer backaches, they had less insomnia, they had less high blood pressure or hypertension. And they also showed a significant increase, a significant blip in productivity and work performance. What the stress is enhancing training did, it changed their mindset. And that's what we're doing with the evidence I'm sharing with you today. So what made the difference? What was it that made this happen? If you've read into this sort of stuff, you've probably heard about the fight or flight response. You probably think that that is the only number one response to stress, but it's not. There are, probably 8 or 10 different responses. That's just the sexy one that finds its way into the social sciences, the business sciences. But there are other responses. In the fight or flight, it's a situation where you see whatever situation you're confronted with as a threat. Your body is programmed to switch off your thinking, switch off everything you need, except that which you need to run or fight your way out of things, and you get all of the things we just spoken about there: heart rate and breathing increased, blood vessels constrict, etc. But there are other responses. One of them is called a challenge response. And you've had the challenge response. On that day when you were in flow, when the boss said, I need you to do a really killer presentation for the organization, and where you got up and you did that presentation, you did the best work you ever did. You also had stress, but you didn't have a fight or flight response. You didn't run out of the room. You didn't run away from it. You had a challenge response. You rose to it. And that's a similarly automatic response. Now, you're still stressed. On your best day, when you were really killing it, your heart rate and your breathing is still faster. You're still under stress. It's just that you're responding to it differently. Because the body instinctively knows when you have a challenge response that it's not life-threatening. It knows that it doesn't have to push the blood around the body to the arms and the legs. So the blood vessels are not as constricted, so you don't have that high blood pressure. More oxygen is routed to the brain during a challenge response, and there's a different ratio of stress hormones released. The most important one is DHEA, and you can just think of that as a neurosteroid, and it does for your brain what steroids do for the bodies of bodybuilders. It hypes it up. It makes you brighter, sharper, faster than you've ever been before. So the experience of this type of stress is one of having additional energy, much greater ability to focus, you're delivering peak performance, and you have more confidence in your ability. So the challenge then becomes, how do I trigger myself into the challenge response when it's appropriate? There are times when you should have a fight or flight response. If you're crossing the road and a driver comes at you at 70 miles an hour, you're in the middle of the road and they're obviously going to hit you, I hope you have a fight or flight response, because you won't even be thinking as you dive back for the pavement. That's good. That's appropriate. But if the boss comes in and says, you know that report that we needed for tomorrow afternoon? Well, I need it for this afternoon. That is not an appropriate reaction for a fight or flight response. Some of the stress you experience needs to be fight or flight and will have those deleterious, those negative effects upon you. But much of it, many of the stressors we have, should be met with a challenge response. But we become accustomed to that fight or flight response. Let's look at how we can change that. Now, before I do that, here's an excellent book, by the way, really, really well worth reading if you haven't read it, by Kelly McGonigal. It's called The Upside of Stress, and she talks a lot around this topic. I love the way she describes simply the way the brain works in this situation. Every time you reach or hit a stressful moment, you weigh the demands of the situation against the resources you bring to it. In other words, you look at it and you say, can I cope with this? And you make that rapid assessment. That evaluation is key. If you believe that the demands of this thing, this threat in front of you, exceed your abilities, exceed your resources, you'll have a fight or flight or a stress response. If you believe you have the resources to change or to succeed, I beg your pardon, you'll have a challenge response. If your mindset is this something that I can deal with? Yes, it is. Then you have a challenge response, and it's a very, very different impact upon your system and the outputs. Just in very simple health terms, here's what we saw is the classic fight or flight response. The blood vessels narrow down, and that's why harmful stress is so harmful for you. There are lots of other reasons, but this is one of them. Whereas if you have a challenge response, the blood vessels don't contract. And so you don't have that particular really severe impact of the stress impact of the fight or flight response. So here's the graph we looked at before. So you'll notice that you get to that top and you think, oh man, I'm stressed. And where you start to go automatically, because your system does, is down into distress. You start to dive down into a place where your body goes into autopilot. But if you can figure out how to trigger the challenge response, well then what you get is a blip. Okay, you get a bounce. You get this ability to actually basically surf that stress response. You have a challenge response, and you don't fall into distress. So the question becomes, how do I get that challenge response? Now the first part is just mindset. Okay, and I'm going to give you a way of starting to build the muscle that makes it more normal for you to have that challenge response where it's appropriate. So where you notice that you have a challenge, you're falling into stress, and you can get yourself to a place where you say, I can deal with this, well then you don't have all of those negative effects. Now, are you going to have some stress that's going to stress you really? Absolutely. Somebody drives into your car and crashes into the side of you, you're going to have a fight or flight. Your heart's going to be flying. You're going to be full of adrenaline. You're going to be full of cortisol, and that's actually appropriate. But there are so many other things that we deal with that just don't need that response. So let me be clear before I ask you something else. Let me be clear. I am not saying that you want more stress in your life. You really don't. So people may be thinking, oh man, if I could just get myself more stress, I can really be the best version of myself. Highly unlikely. And I'm not saying if you're a leader or a manager of people that you need to stress your people more. For crying out loud, absolutely not. Let me be really clear. What I'm saying is a large portion of the stress that you experience has a disproportionate response, the fight or flight response. You need to be on challenge response. So looking at that, and that was the sort of background of what they call the stresses enhancing training. In a few moments, I'll show you how to trigger that challenge response. But let me just ask you at this point, what is your inclination? What are you inclined to think as you move forward, as we exit this session? If we finish this session right now, what would you be doing? Would you be saying, I'm going to keep pushing down stress? Or are you going to say, it's a normal thing. It's something we all experience. And I'm going to consciously see if I can help it, see if it can help me to excel. And I see there's a fairly dramatic difference from the first time. So if you've made that trip, that's great. Because the mindset shift is the most important shift. I'm going to show you how to make the physiological shift now in a moment. But the mindset shift is the most important thing. The moment you start to think, oh, not all stress is bad, and it need not be the end of the world for me, you put yourself into that same category with those people in that original study we looked at, where they got much better outcomes because they had that mindset that not all stress is bad for you. I love the way this lady puts it. She's the COO of Facebook, or Meta as it's called now. She puts it perfectly. We cannot change what we're not aware of. But once we're aware, we cannot help but change. So let me tell you, and let me promise you this, that right now, just the fact that you have made that trip and you're thinking, oh, not all stress is bad, it's already started to change the way you respond to it. what we want to do is lock that in and give you an approach to dealing with that stress, which is sustainable. Now, I'm going to swap to Aoife there just for a moment and just say, and let me see, did it kill your audio? It did. No, there you go. And say, have we any comments in the chat, Aoife, or any questions or anything coming up? Oh, why am I not getting you? Okay, let's try that again.
Yeah, there we go, Derek.
There we go.
So yeah, we do indeed, Derek. Thank you. Lynette was just commenting when you were talking about the flow zone. And also that seems like the fight or flight response is automatic while the challenge response takes more time or decision. Would you not then have to bring or talk yourself back from that natural physiological response?
Yeah, that's a really great question. In actual fact, the fight or flight response and the challenge response are automatic responses, and in an ideal world they would be proportionate, so that automatically you would make the decision that, oh, this is a situation I don't need to be terribly stressed about, and you're not making a decision. That decision is just made, and you end up in challenge response. But let me tell you what happens when you go through a period like the pandemic over the last 2 years, where we're getting stressor after stressor after stressor. That amygdala, that inclination to go into fight or flight, becomes a little bit like a hair trigger, and it becomes much more conditioned to fall into fight or flight than it did before. So it becomes habitual. So in answer to your question, Lynette, yes, they are automatic responses. But over the last couple of years, we will have fallen more to a place where we're inclined to fall into more of the fight or flight. It becomes habitual. Now, what we're going to do next, thank you for setting it up. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at how do you start to reverse back some of that habit? And I'm going to give you a very practical way of doing that. So thank you for that. Was there any other comment there, Aoife?
Yes, Derek. Azim is asking us, in both circumstances, does breathing increases? Like in both scenarios?
Absolutely. When here's the thing. We spend a lot of our time under stress. But what we call stress is the stress we don't like. I'll give you a for example. Think back to the last time you had a first date with somebody that you really, really wanted to work out. Or think back to the last time you were about to start a new job following day. And you would have described yourself, I would say, as excited, buzzing, up. You were stressed. Your heart was beating faster. You were breathing more deeply. There was cortisol in your system. You were experiencing all of many of the effects of stress. But because there was this excitement about meeting that person or starting that new job, you didn't call it stress, because stress is something we give, is a name we give to something we don't like. You called it excitement. Excitement is just that kind of stress that we decide, that we decide that we liked. So, Azim, yeah, you're experiencing many of the same symptoms. So, for example, as I stand here in front of you, I think it's safe to say, even though I've done this a lot, that my heart is beating faster and I am on higher alert doing this presentation than I would have been an hour ago sitting with my grandson. You know, it's a no-brainer. Now, right now, because all the technology is working, I'm actually experiencing that as excitement and buzz. But if the technology goes wrong like it did at the beginning, that'll very quickly turn from excitement and buzz into outright stress. So this is a question of, we don't often notice that we have a lot of really good stress in our lives. You know, we have an awful lot of things that we experience that stress us, but we don't consider them stress. And we have an awful lot of things that we do consider stress on autopilot that don't need to have that designation. And so what we want to look at is how, when it's appropriate, can I trigger a stress response that goes into a challenge response? So thank you for that, Azim.
Perfect. Thanks, Derek. We have a few more questions that have come in, but I know you're about to cover those questions with some content. So I'm going to let you move on, and then we can come back to them towards the end.
Super. Well, the good news is, despite the little trip up at the beginning, we're actually in good shape time-wise. So I think we will be able to come back to that in a couple of moments. So let me just swap back here. Yeah. So what I'm going to share with you are 4 steps that you can use next time you find yourself under stress to start to build the muscle of the challenge response and to start to build a habitual approach to dealing with stress that over time becomes more normal and ensures that you have a proportionate response to it. It uses a 4-letter acronym, RAIN. This is my version of it, slightly different. It was originally originated by, oh my God, I've forgotten the lady's name, by a coach in the United States. And I just love the fact that it's so easy to remember RAIN. So next time you feel stress, let it rain, man. Let me ask you while I'm talking and as I get ready to introduce this. Now, this is really important. If we were in a session where I was talking back and forth to you on Zoom or something like that, I'd be getting you to share with me. But I want you to go back in time and think back in time to a situation where you thought, oh my God, I'm screwed. This is going to go so wrong. This is going to be a car crash. Everything's going to go wrong. But you turned it around and you succeeded. Now, I can tell you that if you go onto YouTube and you look for my talk, my TED Talk, the first TED Talk I did, you'll see in that TED Talk a couple of times when it appears that I am using these kind of very strategic pauses in the middle of sentences. In actual fact, what was going on there was I had completely, because I was stressed out over the fact that I couldn't reach the water from where I was standing, I got stressed, I forgot where I was. And my mind went completely blank. Now, when I think of a situation where I thought, oh my God, I'm screwed, because in that moment I thought, my parents are watching this. Everybody I work with is watching this. There are thousands of people watching this. And I've just frozen. Oh my God, I'm screwed. But if you go and you watch the talk, you'll see it actually worked out well. And it got some really, really great traction. So I need you to pick up for you a personal experience that you had. And it's really important where you thought you were screwed, but you pulled it out of the fire. So it's a time when you really performed at the highest level that you were capable of performing at. You really did the best work ever, or you experienced significant personal growth. Now, what I just say to you, if it is just, when you're looking at that incident, just think, how was I feeling just before things went right? And if you were not feeling seriously stressed, find another memory. I need something where you knew, oh man, I'm stressed, things are going to go wrong, and but you actually managed to work out. And I'll show you why that's important in a moment, because it really is. Okay, let's go into this 4-step process, really easy. First one is, one of the things that's happened, particularly over the last couple of years, is we have been under this low-level stress continually because of the environment we're living in. So much that we've stopped noticing that we're stressed. You cannot deal with stress until you bring awareness to it. So the first thing you need to do is, in the moment when you notice, I'm suddenly exhausted, or, oh my God, I think everything's going to go to the crap. It's all going to fall apart. In that moment, you just need to just stop for a second and say, oh, look at this. I'm becoming stressed. And that's really important because it has a big impact on the way this works. Remember we said about the triggering the release of cortisol and going off on autopilot. That is, as I said, happening without the involvement of the thinking brain. In the moment that you have a thought, an intentional thought, where you say, I'm becoming stressed, you engage the thinking brain. One of the primary jobs of the thinking brain is to down-regulate the emotional brain when it's overreacting. So the moment that you think, oh, I'm becoming stressed, you're triggering the thinking brain to start to ramp back the response, the automatic response. So that first step is just recognizing that stress, and that starts the process. The second thing is, Allow that stress to be there. You will never, ever, 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 I hope, eliminate all stress from your life. Because if you do, all of the color and the shade and the excitement and the things that make life interesting will be gone. You cannot push against it. Carl Jung said, what you resist persists. If you start thinking, I'm not going to think of a pink elephant. I'm not going to think of a pink elephant. I'm not going to think of a pink elephant. Suddenly your world is full of pink elephants. If you think, I'm not going to allow myself to be stressed, I'm going to push it down, I'm going to breathe my way through it, it gets worse. So the first thing is, recognize that it's a normal response. If you're feeling stressed, it's a normal response for you. If you feel, oh my God, that is normal. It's not something to say, oh my God, why am I feeling this way? You're feeling that way because you're human. So it's okay to feel this way, and say that to yourself. So don't push back, just, okay, I don't like this. This is really unpleasant. I don't care for this, but the McCann guy said it's okay, so it's okay. This is a normal reaction for this situation. Stress is such a normal reaction for so many situations. It is your emotional brain in a very cack-handed way trying to help you to deal with potential threats. Here's a line I think is enormously useful, that's really useful, is, oh, starting to feel stressed. This is my body preparing me to be maximally effective. Now remember, I talked about secondary stress. Remember where that came from. Something happens and you say, oh my God, I'm feeling stressed. Oh, I don't like stress, I've got to get rid of this. And I've got to push it down, and the brain says, oh, there's stress there, that's a threat, let's get stressed about it, and you get this cycle. Well, when you say, and you just basically think, this is my body preparing me to deal with this. This is my body getting me ready to get the best possible outcome in this situation. You break that cycle. That cycle stops, and it gives you choice. So the first step was, I'm becoming stressed. Should engage the thinking brain. Second step is allow it. Just, it's okay. Don't like it, don't care for it, don't want it, but it's okay. It's my body preparing me to deal with this. The third step uses that experience, and it's really important that I had you think about. When was the last time I felt this way? When was the last time I thought, oh my God, it's all over, and I pulled out of it? And you just bring that back to mind, tune back in and think, I've been here before. I've had this experience. How did I get through it? I moved through it. In that moment, it gives you a much greater perspective. It allows you to focus away from where your brain wants to go. Your brain's trying to keep you safe. It's going, what if this happens? What if, what if, what if, what if, what if? In that moment, you can say, what is actually going on? Never mind the catastrophization. What can I do now? Your brain will be inclined to say, oh, you can't do this. We haven't a chance to do this. There's no opportunity to do this. What can I do? What's the first step I can take? And here's, again, my mantra. How can I use this energy boost to improve the outcome now? Recognize the stress. That's the aura. Accept it. This is my body getting me ready to deal with this in the best way possible. How do I use the boost of energy I know that I have? You're triggering a threat, or you're triggering a challenge response. You're having a response that says, I've got this. I had it before, I've got this. Now the last step in this is the more difficult one to get your head around. If you can get the first three, the last one will come in time. And it's just not me. Because it's hard to get this perspective when you're experiencing it. But stress is just a set of physiological sensations, signals that are sending, that your body is saying to say, we may have a problem. You can choose to act upon them or not act upon them. You can choose to catastrophize, or you can choose to rise to it. You can choose to say, I'm screwed, or you can choose to say, okay, I think I might have a way out of this. I've been here before. The reality is, physiologically, most emotions come and go in about 90 seconds. So they tend not to last unless we harness them up and we continue to spin on them and spin on them and spin on them. So the last one is, that's interesting. there's where I feel stress. It's a tightness in the chest. It's my gut is all tightened up. My shoulders are rising. That's interesting. It's not me. I don't have to follow it. It's just my body automatically reacting. So next time you notice stress, it's those 4 steps. Notice it, allow it. This is my body getting me ready to deal with this. Investigate it. How can I use the energy boost? And don't be a slave to those feelings, to those emotions. Now, you won't remember that next time you're stressed. You just won't, because that's the nature of stress. It's trying to turn your brain off so that you can just get onto autopilot. And for that reason, you have to build the habit. Here we've created a rain checklist. On the left-hand side is a QR code. If you hold your camera over that, you'll be able to download it directly. We don't need your name. We don't need your email. You can just grab it. And what I'd suggest, you print it out and you put it on your desk. And next time you notice, I'm starting to get wound up, sit down and just work through the steps. You won't want to. Your body wants to run or fight or flight. You won't want to. But the more you do it, the more habitual it becomes. And before you know where you are, you're recognizing, you're accepting or allowing, and you're investigating, all without any conscious thought. In exactly the same way as you have the fight or flight response, you're automatically having a challenge response where it's appropriate. Now, as I say, if you're crossing the road and the car comes at you at 70 miles an hour, you're not going to be whipping out your rain sheet, because you should be having a fight or flight. But if the boss comes in and says, I need that report tomorrow afternoon instead of Friday, tomorrow afternoon is Friday, instead of Monday, well then that's when you do it. Now, this is like everything else. It's a habit that you have to build. It's a muscle that you have to build. So, apology for a little bit of a charge towards the end there, because I was conscious that Aoife said that we had a couple more questions on there and I wanted to get them in. We'll go back in a few moments to the QR code so that you can get the so that you can download that sheet if you want to. And Aoife, I think, is probably, have you put the URL into the? Yeah,
I have indeed. Yeah.
So you said there were a few questions on there. Were they actually answered by the session?
I think so, but I think there's probably a little bit more advice that you could share for this question. So the first one is, any tips for helping my team members dealing with stress, particularly with remote teams?
Yeah, you know what? Seriously, and this is going to sound very, very self-serving, but one of the challenges with this is we all have to use that expression that comes from the Bible, put our hand in the wound ourselves. And if you try to sit down with somebody and say, most of the stress that you experience is not really stress, and you could have a challenge response and you can change, they're not going to buy that. They're going to think you're for the birds. So one of the things, and I'm serious, you could do is you could share a link to this recording and suggest that they work their way through it. Because what we found is that when people work through that, it makes a difference. We do this as part of several of our resilience programs, and we have the benefit of being able to come back the following week and say what happened. And what people tell us is it gave them enormous perspective, and it gave them the confidence and the self-assuredness that I have a tool set for dealing with. So that's the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do is I would, in the best way I can as an individual, and there's no single way of doing this, I'd make it clear that I am open to talking and to listening in a non-judgmental way, because I don't know about you, but I find when I'm severely stressed, the best thing I can do is vent and have a conversation with somebody. So I would say be that open ear, take that resource that we had there, the rain sheet, take this recording, and maybe get your team into a room and sit them down and say, let's watch this. And if you think of somebody that can benefit with the sheet, don't worry, we're not going to come after you if you share it with the world. Share it with anybody you like. So that would be one way. The other way, here's really self-serving. You could call Genos and we could talk to you about a resilience program to really help you get your team into a business. Yeah.
I was going to say, Derek, I know we've spoken before with our clients around meeting openers, and check-ins can be a really good opportunity. I know personally, when we're all busy in Genos Europe, we hop on a meeting and we get straight to business and we start talking about what we have to get done. I think taking at least 5 or 10 minutes to check in on a personal note, ask each other how they're doing. Is that something that you'd recommend?
Yeah, and as you know, if as part of our program, one of the things we do at the end of our programs is we'll get a team and the team leader together, and we'll say, you know, as you're opening up a program, let's bring some of these practices into the program. One of the things that can be enormously helpful, and Aoife enforces it upon me, is in our team meetings, is just to say, right, we're going to go around the table, and I want you to tell me what's the best thing that has happened in the team for you this week, or what's the greatest success you've had this week, or what's the best outcome you've had this week, or what's the best thing that's happened to you work or personal wise this week. That even can be a tremendous shift. For those of you who have an organization where there's been any sort of mindfulness training, 60 seconds, let's just stop, close our eyes, take a few breaths. Now let's start our meeting. There are many ways you can do it, but I think there's, those sort of openers, the check-ins, the simple mindfulness practices, all of them help. It's about just putting a punctuation mark into things.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek. The next question is a great one, because about 10 years ago, I was dying to know the answer to this question before I got over my nerves. So do you have any in the moment guidance for when you're struggling with presentations or pitches at work to help reduce stress? I guess it would be that breathing.
Oh yeah, I really do. Let me give you 3 breaths. Yeah, I got 3 fingers up. 3 breaths, a 3-breath practice. And you can do with me now as we talk. Actually, let me come back to that. For the people who are answering the question, I'm going to do that. But I'm conscious that we just hit our time. I just want to say one other thing to you, and that is our next session is on how to become an emotional intelligence expert in 2022. That is on next week, on Thursday, and if you want to sign up for it now so that you get the reminder, if you're not already on a reminder sheet, just hold the QR code or hold your phone over the QR code, and it'll connect you to that invitation. You can sign up and you'll get the reminders from LinkedIn. So yeah, let me give you a 3-breath practice. Oh, sorry, one final thing. If you're running away because we're on time, thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you next week. And then very shortly after that, we have Kira Aspinall talking about leadership. And then we have Richard Boyatzis talking about helping people change. So 3-breath practice. It's called What's Important Now. I learned it when I was qualifying as a teacher for Google's Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And it's very simple 3 breaths. You can do it with me if you like. In the moment when you're feeling stressed. So the first thing is 1 nice, deep, gentle, mindful breath. By mindful, just pay attention to the fact you're breathing. So let's do it now. And just in slowing down the breathing, you're actually triggering the parasympathetic nervous system, which switches off the stress response. Second breath, as you're breathing in, okay, become aware of any spots where there's tension in your body. Your shoulders up high, your forehead clenched, your jaw clenched, your hands, anywhere there's tension. And on the out breath, just let them go soft, let them collapse. So it's just, letting everything sort of relax. And then the third breath, as you're breathing in, you're just thinking, what's important now? And what's important now is, okay, where does my head need to be? There are lots of things going on in your world. What's really important right now? Where do I need my head to be? Sometimes I have to do that 3 or 4 times in a row just to get that perspective on those stressful days. But those 3 breaths, they relax you physiologically. They start to switch off the sympathetic nervous system, which is your stress response, switch on the parasympathetic nervous system, start to settle you down a little bit, slow your heart down, and then that question just allows you to say, of all the mess in front of me, all of the things I have to get done, what's important now? That's my best in the moment. Before you do the presentation, what's important now? What's important now is to show up and do the best job I can. I can forget about everything else. Okay. Was there another one?
I wish I had you 10 years ago, Derek, to tell me that.
I wish I had me 20 years ago to tell me that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Derek.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much, Aoife. Thank you very much for taking the trouble to come along to the session. I hope we see you on future ones. I want to tell you that we have added 3 or 4 more speakers since we spoke last time, but I'm not going to get into it right now. But let me tell you, we have one hell of a speaker panel or a speaker list coming up for you over the next year. Hope to see you on the next one. Meantime, do reach out to us if you have any questions or queries around this particular topic. But I'll see you later. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to close off with that on the screen so that people can grab it if they need to. So take care, folks. Bye-bye.